we executed the largest fentanyl bust in the history of the U.S.
Federal agents in New York City making the largest meth bust in recent history.
What if one perfectly legal truck was actually hiding the most dangerous drug network in America?
FBI agents have arrested key suspects in a major drug trafficking network hidden within a U.S. logistics company.
2:17 p.m., San Antonio, Texas. A refrigerated truck eases down a sun-bleached highway, one of thousands moving that afternoon. The manifest is clean. 20-plus tons of produce are sealed inside. Nothing looks off. Nothing asks for attention. That's exactly why it matters. This isn't a story about a bad stop or a nervous driver. It's about how an entire system learned to blend in. How perfect paperwork and precise routines became a kind of invisibility, hiding something far more expensive than vegetables beneath the floor. If you had been there with only a moment to decide, would you have let it roll on? Stay with me, because what happened next forced federal agents to rethink millions of miles they believed were safe. Subscribe now and let's uncover what was hiding in plain sight. At 2:17 p.m., along a sun-scorched highway outside San Antonio, Texas, a refrigerated semi-truck eased toward a routine federal checkpoint. No sirens, no weapons raised. Just clipboards, scanners, and a process repeated thousands of times every day across America. The truck belonged to a nationally certified logistics carrier. Its records were flawless. Temperature logs showed a constant 34 degrees Fahrenheit. The manifest listed 24 tons of fresh produce bound for a Midwest distribution hub. The driver's credentials were clean, over 600,000 miles logged, 0 violations, 0 failed inspections. By every visible measure, the system was working exactly as designed. That was when the K9 unit stopped, not barked, not lunged. The dog sat down near the rear axle and refused to move. Handlers knew the signal. Paperwork no longer mattered. Pallets were unloaded, crates opened, walls tapped. Nothing appeared out of place. But scanners told a different story. Beneath the trailer floor, density readings spiked. The structure was several inches thicker than standard, reinforced in a way no refrigeration system required. Bolts were removed, panels lifted. Hidden below the cargo, agents uncovered nearly 95 kilograms of vacuum-sealed methamphetamine stacked with industrial precision. Estimated street value, over $9 million from a single truck. In that moment, this stopped being a traffic stop. It became the first crack in a system that had been moving unseen for years. 30 minutes later, under cold fluorescent lights, the driver said the same thing again. He had run this route for almost 8 years, logged over 700,000 miles, crossed state lines more than 400 times without a single citation. Every test clean. Every inspection passed. He didn't load the truck. He didn't touch the cargo. He delivered produce and went home. Agents checked everything anyway. GPS records matched fuel stops down to the minute. Toll cameras across 6 states showed the same pattern, week after week. Maintenance logs were spotless, serviced every 10,000 miles like clockwork. Nothing was missing. Nothing stood out. That was the problem. This wasn't a driver hiding drugs. This was a machine hiding drugs from the driver. When technicians pulled the trailer apart, the design told its own story. The hidden compartment could only be opened by removing pallets in an exact sequence. 9 precise moves, timed between cooling cycles. The floor wasn't reinforced randomly. It was mounted on calibrated supports, spreading weight so evenly that scale readings stayed within a 3% margin. To scanners, it looked normal. To inspectors, it felt ordinary. It wasn't. The compartment held its temperature within half a degree, masking everything beneath 24 tons of produce. This wasn't improvisation, it was engineering. Analysts widened the lens. Out of hundreds of trailers on record, dozens shared the same signature. Identical service gaps, identical routing loops, repeating every 20 weeks. Patterns stacked. Coincidence disappeared. By then, the question had changed. How many trucks were built like this? How long had they been rolling? If even 40 vehicles were active at once, The system could move tens of tons every year without leaving a trace. So ask yourself, if the driver never knew and inspections never failed, who was this system really designed for? Because the road was no longer the focus. The next step would lead straight to the company that built the silence. By nightfall, the case no longer fit inside a single truck. What investigators were mapping now was a structure, routes repeating with quiet precision, trailers resurfacing across states weeks apart, schedules that looked inefficient but never missed a window. This wasn't movement. It was rhythm. Attention shifted south to Corpus Christi. A cold storage facility near the port, approved years earlier as a minor logistics site, showed unusual behavior. Power consumption ran nearly 40% higher than reported. Concrete thickness exceeded plans by measurable margins. Ground scans hinted at empty space where none should exist. At 4 a.m., the order was given. More than 400 agents moved at once. Highways across 11 states were sealed without sirens. Way stations activated hours early. The first truck stopped smoothly, the driver still holding his coffee. Beneath crates of produce, agents uncovered over 60 kilograms of narcotics, packed, labeled, staged. Then another stop, then another. By 4:30 a.m., dozens of trucks were detained, each one identical. Clean drivers, perfect paperwork, hidden compartments built to the same tolerances. What had looked like coincidence was now repetition at scale. In San Antonio, teams entered the company's glass front headquarters. Doors came down. Servers were pulled while systems were still live. Executives were secured before sunrise. Farther south, agents breached the Corpus Christi facility. Behind reinforced concrete, they found the missing piece. A tunnel over 400 meters long, wide enough for industrial carts lined for continuous movement. Inside, pallets waited in silence, nearly 1.5 tons staged for transport before dawn. Within hours, hundreds of millions in assets were frozen. More than 170 people were taken into custody. Communication channels collapsed mid-transfer. Routing software went dark. This wasn't a seizure meant to send a message. It was an operation designed to stop the machine completely. As the sun rose over Texas, trucks stood motionless under federal guard. The flow had ended, but the full weight of what had been uncovered was only beginning to settle. When the roads went quiet, the real work began. Inside the seized headquarters, technicians moved methodically through server racks that still hummed with residual heat. Hard drives were tagged, backup units cloned. Within the first 18 hours, analysts extracted more than 90 terabytes of internal data, emails, routing software, maintenance schedules, insurance filings. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Clean audits, safety awards, on-time delivery metrics polished for investors. Then, the patterns emerged. Analysts flagged over 1,200 shipments spread across 8 years that followed routes no logistics manager would ever choose. Fuel costs were higher. Transit times were longer. On paper, these trips lost money, sometimes $12,000 to $18,000 per run. Yet the routes never changed. They repeated with mechanical consistency. The explanation wasn't hidden in one transaction, it was buried in thousands. Refrigeration repairs billed just under $45,000. Consulting fees capped at $39,000. Maintenance contracts issued to companies that existed only as mailboxes. Individually harmless. Together, they formed a steady financial current. Over time, investigators calculated that more than $600 million had moved through the system without triggering automatic reporting thresholds. Then came the vehicle data. A senior analyst froze the room when she overlaid 2 federal databases. The same trailer identification numbers appeared twice, one tied to routine produce deliveries, the other quietly linked to narcotic seizures in unrelated cases across multiple states. The trucks didn't just carry cargo, they carried dual identities. One passed inspections, the other was never meant to exist. That discovery shifted the classification of the case. This was no longer about drugs hidden in compartments. It was about a system that hid inside compliance itself. Every form was filed, every signature real, every rule followed, just precisely enough to avoid scrutiny. By the time dawn arrived, investigators understood the truth they hadn't wanted to face. This network hadn't beaten oversight. It had learned to wear it. And once that realization set in, the question was no longer how the system worked, but how much damage it had already done. The damage did not reveal itself in warehouses or spreadsheets. It surfaced on maps that had nothing to do with logistics. Analysts overlaid 7 years of delivery routes with public health records, emergency calls, and hospital admissions. The alignment was immediate. Counties, served by the priority routes, showed spikes that could not be explained by population growth or economics alone. In some regions, meth-related emergencies rose nearly 70% faster than in neighboring areas. Rural towns were hit hardest. Clinics built for 6 beds were treating 25 patients in a single night. The pattern followed the roads. In communities where those trucks arrived weekly, overdose calls clustered within predictable windows, 36 to 72 hours after scheduled deliveries. Emergency responders described the same scenes repeating. Older users relapsing after years clean, teenagers collapsing after first exposure, families unraveling without warning. Investigators began calling drivers back, not as suspects, but as witnesses. Men and women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s sat across from agents in quiet rooms, stunned. Many had driven for decades. One had logged over 1.2 million miles without a single citation. Another had trained new hires for years. When shown images of the hidden compartments, their reactions were identical: silence, then disbelief. "I carried food," one driver said quietly. "I thought I was feeding people." Records confirmed their stories. At least a dozen safety reports had been filed internally over the years. Complaints about uneven weight, strange handling, refrigeration behaving oddly. Every report had been logged. Everyone had vanished within days. No threats, no warnings, just paperwork absorbing the noise. That was the camouflage. The drivers were not expendable labor. They were shields, trusted faces, clean records, the kind of people inspectors wave through without hesitation. The system didn't hide drugs from the public. It hid them behind credibility. Child welfare agencies later reported a 40% increase in removals along those same corridors. Foster systems strained. Schools reported sudden enrollment gaps. Entire households collapsed quietly, one delivery at a time. By the end of the week, investigators understood the scale of what numbers alone could never show. This operation hadn't just moved narcotics. It had reshaped communities. Slowly, repeatedly, and almost invisibly. And the most unsettling realization was this: by the time the trucks were stopped, much of the damage was already written into the roads they traveled. When the company ceased to exist on paper, the silence that followed felt unnatural. Operating licenses were revoked within 48 hours. Assets were frozen, properties fenced. Trucks that once crossed state lines daily now sat motionless, tires chained, logos stripped as if they had never belonged to anyone. More than 500 drivers were suddenly unemployed. Many learned the truth through the news. Federal briefings were held, not interrogations but explanations. Some stared at the floor. Others wept. They had trusted the system. They had believed honest work kept the country moving. And then something rare happened. Within 2 weeks, emergency rooms along former routes reported a 22% drop in meth-related admissions. Law enforcement noted fewer late-night break-ins. Shelters logged fewer midnight intakes. The change was fragile, but real. For the first time in years, some towns felt a pause. But no one inside the investigation mistook it for an ending. Internal assessments delivered a harder truth. The model was efficient, scalable. It had worked for years without raising alarms. Atlas National was not unique. It was simply refined. The final numbers were staggering: tens of tons seized, hundreds arrested, hundreds of millions frozen. Yet those figures told only part of the story. The deeper cost couldn't be logged in kilograms or dollars. It lived in empty bedrooms, in classrooms missing students, in families reshaped by absence. The machine had been cut away, the roads were quieter, but the scars it left behind were already woven into the landscape, and they would take far longer to fade. When the last truck was placed under federal guard and the highways finally fell quiet, the operation didn't feel like a victory. It felt like an aftermath. A machine had been stopped, but the damage it left behind was already written into towns, families, and years that couldn't be returned. So let me ask you, how many systems do we trust every day without ever looking beneath the surface? If this story made you think, share your thoughts below. And if you want to keep uncovering how power, logistics, and silence collide in the real world, stay here with me.